Right, okay, so just real quick, I had a thought. A couple of days ago, I was having a conversation with somebody, and the concept of human agency and free will came up, and I usually brush it off, and I tried to, but for some reason the next day I kept thinking, no, this was like 2 days later. I went to bed, and for like an hour I was just laying there and thoughts were spinning, and in the morning the same thing happened. I just couldn't get up because I was so busy thinking. I couldn't get out of bed. But well, here's the idea. For me, the conversation has always been between either we have no agency and everything's already written out for us in a story and we're just living that out, or we have agency and there's no determinism, which also, or rather, we have no agency, or we have agency and there's no determined path, and we're creating reality as we go. And I've always avoided this conversation because both ideas have unresolved issues for me. I don't know if they work in ways that maybe I just haven't found yet, but as far as I'm concerned, they don't work. The first, because if everything's already written out, then kind of the whole point of existence is sort of a joke. There's no real reason for any of it. Like it's like yeah, like there's no incentive, there's no plot line. It's all just kind of there, and it's sort of like lip syncing to a song, or a band performing with a backing track, pretending to be playing live, which I guess since that's not always bad, then maybe in this case, if you reframe your view on living as we're not supposed to reinvent reality or invent reality, we're just supposed to play it out. Who knows? But anyway, that side's got a bunch of problems. And then over on this side, with having complete free agency, means there is no determinate force that already knows what we're going to do. There is no I'm trying to avoid religious terms, but it's a bit hard. There is no original, all-knowing creator. There is no beginning from which you can deduce all future events. Which means there are things that are immeasurable. Which means there are things that have their composition is not understandable. It's incomprehensible. It's like irrational. Like it's not a logical process. It's some sort of mysticism. And where the reason why this doesn't work for me is, again, because mysticism like that just doesn't make any sense at all. Like in the past, all forms of mysticism, all forms of magic, have always been just poorly understood or not yet revealed forms of science. Like we used to think that, making gold was magic. You could put things together and magic and you get gold. When in reality, it's just manipulating particles and molecules in a certain way to get a certain, object with a certain consistency. So this is a mess and this is a mess. But the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I think there's a third, I don't know if it's quite a third path or a third perspective, or if it's just a play off of the deterministic one. But I've always sort of leaned towards the deterministic one because that makes more sense to me. But from this, you can kind of attribute it's not quite free agency, but it's almost as if, okay, maybe it is maybe I am reframing this version where everything's already written out. But it looks a little more like things are written, but it's not cruel, it's not a joke. It's just that this is what needs to happen for free agents to be tempered. So it's like sand going through a kiln to become glass. You can't just turn sand into glass by putting it together really hard. You have to heat it up and melt it, and it becomes one conglomerate. So maybe this and if biblical history is tied into this, then creation and fall and the crucifixion, instead of it just being all kind of like a weird mess that makes no sense, it's like, why would you make things that are gonna mess up and then you have to save them? But maybe that's just because how existence has to be. If you want existence to reach its natural, its state of refinement, and it has to be refined. It has to go through that process of temperament. You can't just make something. This is again this is all conjecture. You can't just make something perfect without eliminating possibility for error. Like if I make a robot that only ever gives me the right answer based on a calculation that maybe even I can't understand, well, that robot doesn't have a choice to do anything. That robot simply does what it's told to do. Whereas if the robot has like a modern intelligence, artificial intelligence, where it has to go through a process of learning, and it has to adapt to responses, well, then it has to be tempered, it has to be fed information, and it has to make those mistakes in order to become a much more sophisticated form of intelligence. Like, I think with AI we're getting a bit closer to the perspective of God, which is kind of scary, because it's almost like you can't make an intelligent being as intelligent as we are without allowing for the possibility of both error and malevolence. So problems on both sides, non-intentional and intentional problems. Because a robot that can do math, like a calculator, is fast, it's accurate, but it can't take over the world. Your calculator is not going to conquer the world. But a human being can. And what's closer to a human being is newer forms of AI that have to be trained like people. It's interesting, as soon as we start training computers like human beings, then all questions of morality and stuff like that arise. So maybe it's closer to that this is just the natural way things have to be. It's like the question of creating an object that's impossible. You can't make a circle that's simultaneously a square according to how we understand reality. And in the same way, you can't create a being with free will that is perfect and that doesn't, like that, by definition, that is God. It's being perfected, so you can't make beings like that. That is just the whole concept of God. Otherwise, everything would just be God. I think that's all I got for now. I hope some of that made sense.